We'll move to questions without notice, and I'll give the call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Can the Minister confirm whether he has taken his golf clubs with him on any Defence VIP special purpose aircraft flights, and if so, on how many flights?
Order. Members on my left. The member for Patterson will cease interjecting. Give a call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question. Let me be very clear. Every place I have been, everything I have done has been in pursuit of my duties as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence on behalf of this country, and I stand absolutely by every flight I have ever taken on the special purpose aircraft, or for that matter, any flight that I have taken commercially. Now, Mr Speaker, this issue has been kicked along because of a dodgy spreadsheet which has been peddled and developed in the Leader of the Opposition's office.
Order. The member for Barker. It's been a couple of minutes. Order. I'll call the member for Canning on a point of order.
Sure. Back to relevance. Mr Speaker, the question was very specific. Whether or not the minister had taken golf clubs.
Resume your seat. The minister. Order. The minister is being relevant, and I'll make sure he returns to the question.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The question goes to the use of the special purpose aircraft. And this has been kicked along because of a spreadsheet which has been produced by the Leader of the Opposition's office, which has been riddled with errors. Now, the fact that this is in the public domain is because this government released information about the use of the special purpose aircraft during the period of time that the minister, the now Leader of the Opposition, was the then Minister for Defence. Absolutely no information was released about the use of the special purpose aircraft during the time that he was the Minister for Defence, not one piece of information at all. Now, it begs the question, Mr Speaker, as to what the Leader of the Opposition has to hide, but we have something of an inkling in relation to that by virtue of his behaviour since he's been the Leader of the Opposition, because as the now Minister for Defence, my office has logged numerous requests from the Leader of the Opposition about him going on special purpose aircraft, including in the last 6 weeks 2 times at least in writing to go to a game of the Matildas.
Order. Order. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek clarification from you. Is it your ruling that the minister is in order? Given the question was particularly tight, can the minister confirm whether he has taken his golf clubs with him on any Defence VIP special purpose aircraft flights, and if so, on how many flights? It couldn't have been a tighter question. And for his confirmation.
The Leader of the Opposition knows there is only one point of order on relevance, which has been taken before. The Minister for Home Affairs, I'm just going to ask the Minister, he is talking about special purpose flights. I'm just going to make sure his answer is relevant to the question.
And it is, Mr Speaker, just a little revealing of what hurts them the most about the fact that they are now in opposition. Because as sincere public servants, we might think that they regret the fact that they don't have the opportunity to serve the Australian people, but we know in their darkened rooms the only conversation they're having is about how they get back on the planes. Because if the requests from the Leader of the Opposition to my office is any indication, it has been their singular focus. Mr Speaker, the special purpose aircraft are an important capability which facilitates government travel. We use it appropriately. Those opposite know it. Their attempt to politicise it is pathetic, but worse, it reeks of hypocrisy.
Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The date for the referendum for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander recognition through a voice has now been set. What is the significance of this referendum for our country?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Spence for his question and for indeed hosting the event last Wednesday, where we set October 14th as the day when every Australian will have a once-in-a-generation chance to bring our country together and change it for the better, to vote for recognition and listening so that we can get better results, to say yes to an idea that has come from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people themselves, with the support of over 80% of Indigenous Australians. People from all sides of politics, all faiths, all walks of life have come out in support of the yes vote. And last night we saw a true Australian hero, John Farnham, lend his voice and his iconic song to the yes campaign. An inspirational ad showing the moments that have united our country and taking it forward. As he sang, we're not going to sit in silence, we're not going to live with fear. Those opposite have now committed to a second referendum. They say that if Australians vote no on October 14, they'll be subject to another referendum during the next term if they're successful in winning the next election. They're already planning the sequel while doing everything they can to sabotage the original. Their second referendum, though, won't be on what Indigenous people have asked for, just recognition, not a voice. But then on the voice, they say they're going to legislate for a voice as well. So let's get this right. Beneath all of this fear campaign, both sides are saying that they support recognition. Both sides are saying they will legislate for the voice. The difference is, though, they don't want it enshrined in the Constitution as Indigenous people have asked for. They know better, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition says he'll acknowledge that Indigenous people are here and that our history goes back and that it should be acknowledged, but he won't talk with them or listen to them. That is what this is about. It shows that it's all about politics, not about the substance, that is before this referendum. Well, Australians will have the opportunity to vote for recognition through the form that they've been asked for on a voice so that we can listen, so that we can get better results. Because when you listen to people who are directly affected by an issue, you will, of course, get better outcomes.
The member for New England. Give the call to the member for Canning.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Can the Minister confirm whether anyone outside of his family, personal or departmental staff have travelled with him on his Defence VIP special purpose aircraft flights?
Give the call to the Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
I can confirm that there are those who have, ministers from other governments, representatives of other governments, representatives of the media. But let me again be clear that there are legitimate reasons why those who are not on our staff or in the department would be aboard a special purpose aircraft. But the guidelines that are in place I completely comply with, but so do every other person in the government who uses the special purpose aircraft, and I absolutely stand by the way in which all persons on this side have complied with those guidelines. Again, let me be clear. The special purpose aircraft is a critical function which those opposite well know, which facilitates government travel. And the degree to which the Leader of the Opposition has been desperate to get back on those special purpose aircraft ever since he lost government says everything about what he misses most about being in government.
Has the Minister concluded his answer? I give the call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government closing loopholes that undercut pay and conditions for working Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Workplace Relations, Minister for Employment and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the member for Holt, who has spent all her time, both in this parliament and beforehand, trying to make sure that wages are moving for some of the lowest paid Australians. Last year, this parliament legislated for secure jobs and better pay. This year, this parliament, and today, this afternoon, immediately after question time, this government will introduce legislation designed to close the loopholes that undercut wages and conditions in this country. There are four main loopholes that need to be closed. The first relates to the gig economy, then to wage theft, then to casuals, and then to labour hire. On the gig economy at the moment, for all those people working in the gig economy, because they are not technically employees, every single one of their rights falls off a cliff. They have no minimum rates of pay. They have no guaranteed conditions. Every one of their rights falls off a cliff because of the method of engagement. What this government's legislation will do will it be to accept the flexibility. Australians want the technology, people want the flexibility, but you have to be able to have 21st century technology without having 19th century working conditions going with it, and that'll be reflected in today's legislation. On wage theft, it has always been the case, as it should be, that if a worker steals from the till, it's a crime. But it should also be a crime if the employer deliberately steals from the worker. And we saw under those opposite time after time after time where they'd make tough words about wage theft but then do nothing about it in this parliament, to the point where they went through the charade in this House of introducing legislation to make wage theft a crime, voting for it here and then voting down their own legislation once it got to the Senate. On casuals, many casuals, most casuals want to retain the form of engagement that they currently have. But let's not forget, for casuals, 40% of casuals are over the age of 35. And if you're in a position where you are maintaining household expenses, your bills aren't casual, your rent's not casual, try getting a mortgage if you're casual. A number of these people will want to have a right, if their hours already reflect permanent work, to be able to shift to a secure job. And today's legislation will give them that. And finally, for the labour hire loophole. Most businesses don't have enterprise agreements in place, but where they do, the employer has agreed to minimum rates of pay. Those rates of pay should be the minimum of that workplace. They shouldn't be undercut by the labour hire loophole, where suddenly everything that's been registered and agreed to can be forgotten. Those loopholes have been hanging around for years.
Order.
The step to close them happens immediately after question time.
Give the call to the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. Last year, the government appointed a so-called expert panel to review Western Sydney's transport infrastructure needs, which the Prime Minister stated would take the politics out of planning. The report was completed in April and recommended $200 million in urgent infrastructure investment across Western Sydney. Why has the government not made the report publicly available, and when will it be released, considering that the government appointed the expert panel who made the recommendations? Thank you.
I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank very much the member for Fowler for her question and for her championing the cause of Western Sydney alongside so many of those on this side of the House who know what an important economic powerhouse it is for the nation. Can I just say a few things in relation to this? The Australian Government, we of course are committed to ensuring appropriate infrastructure is in place for Western Sydney's growth, prosperity and its livability. The Australian and New South Wales governments are investing $4.4 billion already in Western Sydney Infrastructure's plan, with the Australian government committing over $3.5 billion to that. And in fact, just last week I was actually there with the New South Wales Minister for Transport as Peggy, the tunneller, tunnelled through on the Western Sydney International Airport rail link, which is terrific to see that that investment was there, alongside member for a number of members of this place as well. We'll continue to work in partnership with the New South Wales Government. As you know, they are a new government and they also are undertaking a review of their infrastructure pipeline at the moment, and we've provided the report from the Western Sydney Transport Infrastructure Panel to them, and we'll continue to work through that. As you know from media reports, the report is not public, but it's made a number of recommendations around business cases, which is the right thing to do, to start to do that planning for future investment over the next decade, and we'll be making decisions about that alongside and in partnership with the New South Wales Government.
Give the call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since Parliament last met, how has the Albanese Labor government been addressing cost of living pressures and delivering for Australia?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Pearce for her question. And of course, I was with the member for Pearce just last week in the great state of Western Australia, where I visited Karratha and visited Perth over a 3-day period. And we are working for Australia every single day. Relieving cost of living pressures is, of course, our #1 priority. And since the last sitting of Parliament, we have delivered, from housing right through to health. We had, through the National Cabinet, announced the most significant housing reforms in a generation. A new national target to build 1.2 million homes. A national planning reform blueprint, planning and zoning so that people can live close to their work and their family. A $3 billion new homes bonus to incentivise state governments and territory governments to get homes built. We've secured a better deal for renters, making renting fairer, and we're working with states to deliver Help to Buy that will help to people to purchase a home of their own. We also have, of course, begun on the 1st of December the second round of our cheaper medicines policy. 2 months' worth of medicine for the price of one. And I noticed on the 1st of September the Coalition, Senator Ruston, put out a media release saying they supported 60-day dispensing. They've been opposing it ever since it was announced, but they put out a release saying they're supporting it now. And of course it will make an enormous difference. And we are as well working with community pharmacies to make sure that their interests are looked after as well. And of course on fee-free TAFE, we have
the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will pause. I'll remind all visitors today there are established forms of behaviour. You are not here. You are here to observe and not participate. I ask all members in the galleries to refrain from interjecting, conversing and signalling. The Prime Minister has the call.
Of course we have our fee-free TAFE target. Now that was 180,000 spots, but instead we've got fee-free TAFE enrolments have hit more than 214,000. More than 214,000. I met with many of the young apprentices and people training in everything from nursing to hospitality to construction today. And of course this is the 1-year anniversary of the Jobs and Skills Summit where that policy came from. We've opened 5 urgent care clinics since the last sitting of Parliament, taking pressure off the public hospital system. And we signed, while we're in WA, a Rewiring the Nation deal with WA to secure WA's energy supply. So whether it is energy policy, housing policy, health policy, skills, we are working each and every day for Australia with positive plans, the ones we took to the election and more, making sure they are implemented.
Give the call to the honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Today, hundreds of pharmacists have come to Parliament House to try to meet with government members. Many of them are in the gallery now.
Order.
Minister, why have government MPs refused to meet with their local pharmacists? And can the minister confirm that the government has brought forward the next community pharmacy agreement by 16 months?
Order. Members on my right. Order. The Deputy Leader will pause. Members on my left and right. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I'm trying to help. Just pause. It would be really helpful if the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Prime Minister will cease interjecting. Order. The member for McEwen. I've just reminded members in the gallery not to be interjecting. I'll do the same thing for people on my left and right. I want to hear the question in silence, and I'd like respect shown to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. And I'll give her the call.
My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Today, hundreds of pharmacists have come to Parliament House to try to meet with government members. Many of them are in the gallery now. Why have so many government MPs refused to meet with their local pharmacist? Can the minister confirm that the government has brought forward the next community pharmacy agreement by 16 months to now commence on the 1st of March 2024? And will this government finally listen to the voices of community pharmacy?
Order. The Deputy Leader was heard in silence. The Minister will be given the same courtesy, the same respect. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Members of the Labor caucus have been meeting with pharmacists for the last several months. I've been engaging with my caucus and with members of the crossbench and crossbench parties about the feedback that they've been receiving from pharmacists now for several months. I can also say they've been meeting with doctors and with doctors' groups. And most importantly, I say this as a reminder to those opposite, patients and patient groups. The measure that we announced on Friday, that we delivered on Friday, the Prime Minister has already alluded to, delivers cheaper medicines for almost 4 million Australian patients. 4 million Australian patients. Those with ongoing health conditions like heart disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, and so many others besides. This is delivering on advice that those opposite received 5 years ago. 5 years ago.
Minister,
this cannot be on.
The member for Riverina. Everyone just needs to cool it. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There is an important and relevant part to my question, Minister. Can the minister confirm that the government has brought forward the next community pharmacy agreement by 6?
Yep. The Leader of the House.
Point of order. The relevance point of order that can be taken once during an answer is not there for the questioner to say there was one bit of her question that was relevant, which is what has just been put to the chamber.
So far, the minister was asked about meetings, he was asked about timings, he's listing who he's met with, when he has met them and who, everything else. So, of course, he is being relevant. I appreciate the Deputy Leader would like him to be relevant to a certain part of the question, but under the standing orders, he is being directly relevant, and I ask him to continue.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm simply pointing out that members on this side have been meeting with all interests in this area, with pharmacists, the pharmacist lobby, with individual pharmacists in their electorate, but also with doctors' groups and patient groups. And have a look at what patients' groups said on Friday about the delivery of this measure. I've been asked question after question by those opposite about this measure, and not one of them has ever alluded to the interests of patients. Not one of them has ever alluded to the interests of millions of patients who benefit from this. I can say confidently, that those on this side have met with pharmacists time and time again to understand their view of this measure. Now, to the second part of the member's question, that is about the new funding agreement, or what we call the Community Pharmacy Agreement, I did confirm last week that we had agreed to a request from the Pharmacy Guild, the main pharmacy lobby group, to bring forward negotiations for that agreement, with the aim, if possible, of securing a new funding agreement by the 1st of March. Now, that commitment was contingent upon a decision by the Guild to stand down their campaign against this measure, against this measure. A reasonable person in this building might question whether that commitment is being delivered upon. A reasonable person in this building might question whether that commitment is being delivered upon. But that is a commitment that we have made, and we intend if it's reciprocated by the other side in negotiations, to delivering over coming months?
The member for Casey is getting close to being warned. So is the Leader of the Nationals. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. What have been the results of the Albanese Labor government's fee-free TAFE program in its first 6 months?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thanks, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Hunter for his question and his strong advocacy for tradies and the TAFE sector in his electorate and beyond. Can I say, Speaker, as the Prime Minister said almost a year ago, in fact just over a year ago today, the Jobs and Skills Summit was convened, and the first announcement arising out of that summit was the announcement of having 180,000 additional fee-free TAFE and VET places for 2023 in order to make sure we supplied the skills to our economy. Now, upon election, we realised not only did we inherit $1 trillion of public debt from those opposite, we inherited a massive skills deficit across the entire economy. Didn't matter what trade or what profession, what sector of the economy, there were shortages and we needed to attend to them. Well, I'm happy to say, as the Prime Minister already indicated, that we have exceeded the target both in time and numbers when it comes to this initiative. We've now delivered to 215,000 Australians courses in areas that will acquire, where they can acquire skills in existing and emerging demand. That's exactly what we need. It's what those students need. It's what workers need. It's what our businesses are crying out for. And we've done that by working with industry. And we've done that by working with employers who've told us what they've needed. And we've done that talking to state and territory governments. In fact, last week I was with the Prime Minister and indeed the member for Swan at Bentley TAFE, where we met students. They told us that these cost barriers that were being removed provided opportunities for them to enrol in areas that they wanted to work in but they had difficulties affording to enrol. So this is meeting the needs of those students. I spoke to employers who've said that they were paying, in some instances, the fees of those students, and all of a sudden it was a cost barrier removed for those employers, and they therefore increased the amount of apprentices they put on as a result of removing that cost barrier. So there's lots of good reasons why this is very good policy, and to that extent it is very disappointing that those opposite call this wasteful spending, because I don't believe that students think this is wasteful spending. I don't think that businesses believe this is wasteful spending so that they can get the skills that are in demand. And I don't think certainly others who've spoken with us believe it's anything other than a very important initiative to supply skills that are in need. Now, I know there's a number of students that are from Canberra Institute of Technology that met the Prime Minister and I this morning. There's who's in the gallery, Archie, who said fee-free TAFE is allowing him to study a certificate in cyber security, an area in much demand, and Megan, who's studying hospitality. These are the skills that our economy need, and we'll continue to work with state and territory governments and employers to make sure we deliver them.
Order. The call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister detail discussions he or his office has had with Qantas CEO Alan Joyce or with other senior Qantas directors or executives concerning the Sweetheart deal that has blocked Qatar Airways from additional flights to and from our country, forcing Australians to pay thousands more for their air travel?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The premise of the question is wrong, because Qatar Airways can have more seats in Australia today, right now, and it comes from a complete failure to understand the way that the international aviation system works, which is agreements between nations, not with airlines. Between nations is what occurs. So they are certainly welcome to do so, and they can fly as many flights as they like into Adelaide, into Gold Coast, into Avalon, into Hobart, into Canberra, into Canberra, where there used to be international flights here. And the
Order.
Deputy
The
Leader
Leader of
should
the
know about
Opposition.
flights in the Gold Coast, Mr Speaker. They can also today change the 777s into A380s and fly more people in here. What happens with agreements between nations, and former transport ministers will know this, is that there is nothing unusual whatsoever about agreements not just being ticked and flicked between countries. When we talk about international flights...
Order. Order. Members on my left, the Leader of the Opposition are entitled to order to raise his point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, I mean, this is another slippery answer from this
Order.
Prime Minister. Could he answer it straight or not?
Resume your seat. Resume. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting immediately. So I can hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Point of order on two matters. One, that point of order was an abuse from beginning to end. And secondly, the practice makes completely clear that when you leave the dispatch box, continuing to interject out of your place is highly disorderly.
The Leader of the Opposition knows that was an abuse of standing orders. We're just going to move on. And there'll be sorry, Prime Minister, but there'll be no more today. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My government supports competition. But global aviation is not a free-for-all, which is why Qantas, when they decided to fly from Perth into London, had to get QF9 to go from Melbourne to Perth and into London because they're restricted to just 2 slots. That's why Qantas can't fly into, or any Australian airline, into Paris whenever they like. There's restrictions on flying into Rome. There is no air services agreement with Europe. We have the most competitive aviation market in the world, bar none. And the former minister shakes his head to agree. We have Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Etihad, Malaysian, Cathay Pacific, British, Asiana, Korean, Tiway, Air China, Beijing Air, China Eastern, China Southern, Xiamen Airlines and more. All flying under international agreements between Australia and Europe via another destination. But the truth is, when agreements come forward, ministers have made decisions to defer. And indeed, the former minister, Minister McCormack, has made comments about the decision that he made in February 2018 to put on hold an application by Qatar Airways that only came into practice in January 2022. 4 years under the former government.
Order.
They waited,
the Prime
and that's
Minister's
normal.
time
but they did something else as well.
Concluded. The Prime Minister has asked for if someone can move an extension for the. Is leave granted for the Prime Minister to have an extension of time? Leave is not granted. Order. Order. Members on my right. Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing cost of living pressures and inflation, and what approaches has the government rejected?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Gilmore for asking a question that those opposite dare not ask. They never ask us about cost of living pressures in the economy. Mr Speaker, we know Australians are doing it tough, and that's why our highest priority is rolling out billions of dollars in cost of living relief in ways that take the edge off inflation rather than add to it. Now, we are making welcome progress in the fight against inflation, but we know that people are still under pressure. Higher interest rates, which began rising before the election, are putting people under pressure and slowing our economy substantially. Wednesday's national accounts are likely to show the combined impact of higher interest rates as well as all of this global uncertainty on our own economy. Now, inflation is moderating, but not as fast as any of us would like, but it's moving in the right direction, and we saw that in the numbers for July. And the numbers in July showed monthly CPI has come down to 4.9% from 5.4%, and the quarterly numbers have also shown inflation moderating. Now, what those opposite don't want people to know, Mr Speaker, is that quarterly CPI, the highest it was 2.1% in March last year before the last election, and now it's less than half of that, 0.8%. So our economic plan is all about addressing inflationary pressures, and it's working, and we saw that in the inflation numbers for July. But there were two numbers, Mr Speaker, which were particularly interesting in the monthly inflation data. One number was 6, the other number was 19.2. Now, 6% is the inflation we saw in energy prices in July. 19.2% is the inflation we would have seen in energy prices if those opposite had their way and we weren't helping people doing it tough. It was right there in black and white from the ABS, and they said, and I quote, "This is the ABS," and I quote, "If we exclude the impact of rebates from the July 2023 figures, electricity prices would have recorded a monthly increase of 19.2%. The difference between 6 and 19.2% is our energy plan, which is taking some of the sting out of higher energy prices when people need it. This is the plan those opposite voted against. When they voted no to helping people with high energy prices, they voted yes for even higher electricity prices. This is the price those opposite would have Australians pay for always saying no to everything, even voting no to help with people's electricity bills. No wonder they don't ask us about inflation anymore, Mr Speaker. No wonder the Shadow Treasurer doesn't get a question. He helped create the problem with a decade of chaos. He kept power price rises secret until after the election, and then he voted against people doing it tough. This is the Taylor trifecta, Mr Speaker. This is the mess that we were left with. We take responsibility for cleaning it up. We are working for Australia, and our inflation plan is working as
the Treasurer. Order. Members on my right, the Treasurer will cease interjecting. The member for Page will wait till he's called, and members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Page has the call.
Speaker, can I thank the Treasurer for his compliment? My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister detail discussions he or his office has had with Qantas CEO Alan Joyce or with other senior Qantas directors or executives concerning the sweetheart deal that has blocked Qatar Airways from additional flights to and from Australia, affecting exporters and Australians to pay thousands of dollars more for air travel?
Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting, and the Prime Order. Members on my left and right, the Prime Minister will be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the Shadow Transport Minister, Trade Minister, for his question. The Shadow Trade Minister doesn't know that freight is unlimited. Unlimited. Any airline, anywhere, anytime. And he asked the question about the impact. The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will pause. Member Page has asked his question. He's warned. He will not interject on the Prime Minister for this answer, or he'll leave the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. As I was saying before, with regard to this question, this issue of Qatar, I'll make 2 points. One is that the deal that was asked for in February 2018 took not that term, took till January 2022 to come into place. And that was an interesting deal, Mr Speaker, because it wasn't just over flights. What they did on that deal was put in a safeguarding mechanism into the deal, a special thing which other countries have not had to do to safeguard Australia's national interest. That was put in the agreement between Australia and Qatar. Unlike any agreement that was done during the 6 years in which I was a minister, there was a special agreement put in, and I agree with the actions of the Transport Minister.
Prime Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, it was a very specific question about the discussions the Prime Minister has had with Qantas's chief executive or senior directors or executives. The Prime Minister is conspicuously avoiding dealing with that matter. If he doesn't have an answer, he should be sacked.
Resume your seat. The Prime Minister is being relevant. Under the standing orders, he's being in great detail about the arrangements of deals regarding the airlines mentioned. You mightn't like the answer, but the Prime Minister is being relevant, and he has the call.
This updated deal was a special arrangement between Australia and Qatar because the Australian government at the time was clearly concerned about an abuse of market power. I assume is why it was put in to the agreement. Something that I don't think has been out there. I don't think there was a media release done at the time, but that was done. That was done because of the special circumstances which are there. So if you want to keep asking questions about this, we'll go through the whole answers. The whole answers. And I had one extensive conversation with someone about Qatar. It was not someone from Qantas. It was not someone from Qantas. And so, in terms of the arrangements, that are made, the truth is that all of the time, these agreements, when they're put in, are often deferred. There is nothing unusual about that. And indeed, Qatar, when I was a minister, had their access doubled from 7 to 14 flights in February 2009. There's an aviation green paper process underway to make sure that we get all of the settings right, just as when I was a minister I put in place measures of the green paper and white paper which set Australia up with the most competitive aviation market in the world, bar none.
Order. The Treasurer, Minister of Infrastructure, will cease interjecting so I can hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister representing the Minister for Emergency Management. Today's declaration of catastrophic fire danger weather in Queensland is a sobering reminder that the high-risk weather season has commenced. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to prepare for the summer ahead?
Call to the Minister representing the Minister for Emergency Management.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and could I thank the member for Macquarie for her question. I think many in this House will be aware that her community has been more or less relentlessly hit by natural disaster for the time that she's been in this parliament. She and her family also lost their own home to natural disaster, and she's chosen to take that tragedy and come here to Parliament in part to represent communities around this country who experience these great losses, and I just want to say what a privilege it is to work with her. Speaker, last month the Australian Council for Fire and Emergency Services released their bushfire seasonal outlook for spring, which indicates a higher than average level of risk for the Northern Territory, Queensland, Northern New South Wales, as well as areas of south-east New South Wales, eastern Victoria and along the Victorian and South Australian border. We know that many of the areas of heightened fire risk are the same communities that have been impacted by significant floods over the last 2 years, and we also know that for many of these communities this will be the first significant fire season since the devastating fires of 2019 and 20. The Black Summer fires were a pivotal event for our country. To see such significant and tragic loss of life, to see Australians huddled on beaches in the darkness during the middle of the day, to see our major capital cities shrouded in thick black smoke, these are things that most Australians will never forget. And as a government, it's our job to make sure that we do everything we can to prepare properly for the forthcoming fire season.
To that end, Minister Watt has been convening meetings of the National Emergency Management Ministers, and last week they received a briefing on the long-term forecast for this season, which tells us that because of the weather patterns, there is not only increased risk of bushfires but also increased chance of heat waves and cyclones. All federal, state and territory ministers who are engaged in this task endorsed the second National Action Plan on Disaster Risk Reduction, and this is part of the Albanese government's national commitment to driving down natural disaster risk and building resilience. Speaker, it is very obvious that climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of natural hazards and disasters. As a government, we're not going to sit on our hands, and that's why we are taking such significant action on climate change under the leadership of the Prime Minister and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, because it's not just about this summer or the next. The weather in our country is changing. Severe bushfires will become more common, and we have to respond to that as a country. Through the National Emergency Management Agency, we're working closely with states and territories to make sure that we've got plans for this, and the NEMA's preparedness measures included a summit which will bring together 250 experts in this field to assist the government in this very important national endeavour. Our attitude is that we hope for best, but we always have to prepare for the worst. Thank you, Speaker.
Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. It's very early spring, but parts of Queensland are already facing a catastrophic fire warning. The climate crisis is getting worse, but since coming to government, you've already made 5 coal project approvals. Minister, instead of bragging about stopping 1 or 2 projects while approving many more, when will you do what needs to be done to fight the climate crisis and stop expanding coal and gas?
The call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his question, because it gives me an opportunity to say once again that this government is absolutely committed to action on the climate crisis. And in fact, those opposite had 10 years to act. They had 22 separate climate and energy policies and didn't land a single one. What we've done, in contrast, in the 15 months or so since we were elected, is legislate a pathway to net zero with an interim pollution reduction target of 43%. We've set aside $20 billion for rewiring the nation, $2 billion for green hydrogen, $1.6 billion to electrify our homes and businesses, a national electric vehicle strategy. The list goes on and on. What the Greens don't like to talk about is the number of renewable energy projects which we have approved. Of course, to get to 82% renewable energy is an enormous task. This is probably the biggest industrial change that this country will face in its history, to get to 82% renewable energy. I have doubled the number of renewable energy projects approved, 11 renewable energy projects and more than 100 renewable energy projects in the future, already under assessment. What's interesting about those opposite is they're very keen to encourage me to approve renewable energy projects until there's a particular solar farm they don't like, or a particular wind farm they don't like, or a particular transmission line they don't like. This is an enormous change for our country.
Order. The Minister will pause. The Leader of the Greens.
On relevance, point of order, we're 2 minutes in. The Minister hasn't mentioned coal and gas, the causes of climate change, once, and I ask that she be relevant to the question and the approval of new coal and gas projects.
The Minister is talking about energy projects. I'm listening to her carefully. It's not an excuse, that standing order, to rephrase the question or put your interpretation on it, but the Minister is at this stage being relevant. If she strays too far, she'll be asked to be returning to the question. At the moment, she's being relevant. I'm listening to her carefully with 2 minutes remaining. 1 minute remaining.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I think it just sort of tells you everything you want to know. The transition is about getting more renewables into the grid. That's the change that we need to make as a nation. That's the change that we're committed to because, of course, it reduces pollution, but it also delivers cheaper energy into our homes and businesses, something we know Australian families back. They've decided for themselves by putting millions of solar panels on their roofs. They've worked it out. We know, Mr Speaker, that this transition is a vital one for Australia, it's a vital one for the world, and I'm proud of the action we've taken in stark contrast to those opposite. And I do remind the Greens that they were the ones that teamed up with the Liberals to block action on climate change last time we were in government.
Order. The call to the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered cheaper medicines for Australians while supporting a vibrant community pharmacy sector? What obstacles has the government encountered in delivering cheaper medicines?
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left, I couldn't hear the question. Order. The member will restate her question. Order, and if people interject, they won't be here to hear it either. Give the call to the member for Jagga Jagga.
My question is to the Minister for Health. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered cheaper medicines for Australians while supporting a vibrant community pharmacy sector? What obstacles has the government encountered in delivering cheaper medicines?
Give the call to the Minister. Order. Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my friend and colleague, the member for Jagga Jagga, for that question, because she, at the last election, promised cheaper medicines to her community. And in just our first 12 months, we've delivered three waves of cheaper medicines reforms that are saving hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for those patients. And on Friday, we delivered the fourth wave, allowing almost 4 million Australian patients to ask their doctor for a 60-day script for almost 100 common medicines for ongoing health conditions, things like heart disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, osteoporosis and much more. Mr Speaker, 2 scripts for the price of 1, effectively halving the cost of medicines for almost 4 million Australians, Mr Speaker. Now, this isn't just good for their hip pocket, because we know from overseas evidence it's also good for their health, improving medication compliance by as much as 20%.
Order.
And it will
the Prime
also
Minister,
free up
the
millions.
Health Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Nationals are now warned. The policy is once you're warned, if you interject again, you leave. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Speaker. So good for the hip pocket, good for their health, but it will also free up millions of GP consultations instead of just having to issue routine, repeat scripts, as we know desperately needed out there for more serious health conditions. So it's good for the cost of living and it's good for the health system. That's why so many other countries have been doing this for years, Mr Speaker, and that's why every doctors group, every patient group has strongly supported the policy of 60-day scripts. But I'm asked, Mr Speaker, who stood in the way of this policy? I'm asked who stood in the way. Well, 5 years ago, Mr Speaker, those opposite stood in the way of cheaper medicines by refusing to accept exactly the same advice from the medicines experts as we received last summer. So,
I think I know where this is going. I'll give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, how can this possibly be relevant when the government is ripping out thousands of dollars from community pharmacy and making patients pay? You know it.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House, but I think we know where this is all going.
Just 2 things, Mr Speaker. The first, that was clearly an abuse of a point of order, and secondly, the Deputy Leader had already been warned.
Order. Members on my right will order. It's first day back, and I know everyone's a little excited. The member for Riverina is not helping, trust me. And, of course, I'll hear from the member for Wannon.
Why was it abuse when the Deputy Leader was asking a very legitimate question?
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat, or you'll be going the same way. Order. Standing orders are there for a reason, to maintain dignity of the House. That interjection and that intervention was not within standing orders. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will remove herself from the chamber. The Minister in continuation. Order.
Thank you, Speaker. Just reminding people who stood in the way of cheaper medicines for millions of Australian patients. So they stood in the way 5 years ago, and 4 weeks ago they voted in the other place time and time and time again. It's very clear, Mr Speaker. Those are the savings. The Leader of the Opposition.
Order. Order. Members will leave the galleries quickly and quietly. Order. The Minister has order. The manager will resume his seat. The Minister still has 50 seconds. Before I call him, I want to hear from the member for Warringah.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to raise a point of order under Standing Order 91E, disorderly conduct, from the members of the opposition and the members in the gallery. And I'd ask that security take care of these elements, because when we have had climate protesters, they have been removed. These and continue.
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Warringah is on her feet and will be heard in silence. It's not an excuse to start yelling while another member is on their feet. The member for Warringah will continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I simply say that it is important that we are consistent in this place in how disorderly conduct is treated, and that the encouragement from the opposition for this conduct shows a great disrespect for your position and the orderly conduct of this House. Also, Mr Speaker, in relation to entering the chamber in clearly an intentional way of being dressed in white coats to bring attention to what they are.
Order. On the point. Order. Members on my right and members on my left will cease interjecting. And the member for Cunningham will leave the chamber under 94A. The manager on that point of order.
Well, on that point of order, Mr Speaker, there was a reflection on the opposition in that point which is completely baseless and should be withdrawn.
Order. Order. Just going to ask the House to be silent. The member for Warringah was raising a point about conduct within the House. I warned those in the gallery early in question time today that they were not to participate and were not to interject during question time. As a result of their behaviour, they have left the chamber. But I want to say this going forward. There will be no interjections from the gallery. There will be no movement noise from the gallery out of respect for this parliament, but also the other Australians that are in the gallery. So for the rest of this week and for the rest of the time that I'm Speaker, that will not happen again. Order. The member has been asked to withdraw a reflection. I'm going to ask her to do that. Order. The Manager of Opposition took offence. Yes. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. I want to hear from the Leader of the House. I couldn't hear what the member was saying, but if someone has taken an offence, my policy is for someone to withdraw on both sides of the chamber.
I respect that, Mr Speaker. I simply want to draw your attention to the fact that what the member for Warringah did was drew your attention to conduct of members. Now, that's different to name-calling or what is normally considered a reflection on members. If it is impossible to even take a point of order reflecting on the conduct and drawing to the attention of the chair the conduct of speakers, then a whole lot of points of order can't be taken. What the member for Warringah did is a completely legitimate way of drawing the attention to the chair to how members are behaving. That can't be considered a reflection.
Order. The member for Hume. Just going to ask the front bench on both sides to cease interjecting, so I can hear from the manager. Order.
Specific statement from the member for Warringah, words to the effect that the opposition had been complicit in what had occurred. That is an offensive remark, and she should withdraw it.
Look, I think the point's been made. I'm just going to ask the member to withdraw so we can move on with question time to assist the House.
I withdraw, and I also request, Mr Speaker, that the members of the opposition cease calling out to the...
No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. We're going to continue with question time and the order. And trust me, if people interject on the minister and his remaining answer, they won't remain here either. The minister has the call.
Thank you. Well, amid all of that, what is clear is that these savings the Leader of the Opposition was determined to block. Determined to do everything possible he could block. Well, we're just as determined to back patients in right to the hilt, Mr Speaker, just as determined. Now, we are determined for there to be a vibrant future for the community pharmacy sector. That is why we're reinvesting every single dollar the Commonwealth saves from this measure. And that is why, as I said in an earlier answer, we've agreed to bring forward the negotiation of the next funding agreement with the sector with the aim of getting an agreement by the 1st of March. But ultimately, Mr Speaker, be clear about this. From our perspective, good health policy is about the interests of patients, and that's what cheaper medicines delivers.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister discuss the Qatar application with Mr Alan Joyce prior to the government's decision?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I've gone through the one substantive conversation that I had, and I've said that was not with Qantas, and I received no lobbying from Qantas about this issue. I can't be clearer. I can't be clearer than that, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
This issue, Mr Speaker, goes to the way that global aviation operates. And I've said that in my time as Minister there was one doubling of Qatar Airways eligibility into the gateway airports and one rejection of another application that Qatar put whilst I was the Minister. But the specific agreement that was put into the Australia-Qatar government-to-government agreement was proposed by the then Deputy Prime Minister, Minister McCormack, prior to the second arrival, the sequel of that no one asked for, Barnaby Joyce's election as Deputy Prime Minister a second time. That introduced a safeguards article for Australia, making sure that there wasn't any abuse of market power put in there by any entity, and of course there's only one, airline based in Qatar, that also, of course, operates the airport at Doha as well, and also
the Prime Minister will pause the manager on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Prime Minister did come to a direct answer. He's now off on ancient history, and frankly, he's got no more to say.
Resume your seat. The Prime Minister is being relevant. He was asked a question about the Qatar application. He is talking directly about the Qatar application. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. They asked questions, but I'd suggest that they actually should have asked questions to people on their side who understand the aviation sector. And if they'd done that, then they wouldn't have gone down this rabbit hole, because there are people on that side who understand the way that air services agreements work and the way that global aviation works as well, which is not a free-for-all. Australia seeks access to international markets. Whilst I was the Minister, we weren't successful in getting a European air services agreement, and that has restricted our access substantially. Whilst I was the Minister, we made sure that we did have that access to the US, which led Virgin, as well as Qantas, as well as the US airlines, to be able to fly to Australia as well. We have the most open aviation market in the world, bar none. Bar none. There isn't another country in the world that has the access that we do. Qatar can increase the number of passengers tomorrow coming into Australia, either at the gateway airports by flying different aircraft or going into other airports.
The call to the member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering housing reforms for Australians right across the country?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I also want to thank the member for McNamara. I know that he understands that we were elected with an ambitious housing policy and we've added to it at every opportunity. I know that he's also concerned about the number of renters in his electorate, particularly given that 30% of Australians now rent. And of course we are working hard for Australia to turn around the housing challenges that we inherited. Last month we announced the $3 billion new homes bonus and the $500 million housing support program out of the National Cabinet. This is bringing states and territories together to actually do the planning and zoning reforms to add to housing supply right across the country, Mr Speaker. Of course, the new national target is 1.2 million homes over 5 years from 1 July 2024. We know that this is ambitious, but what we want to do is get supply on the ground right across the country, because we understand that the answer to the issues, whether you're trying to buy a home or rent a home, is supply, Mr Speaker. Indeed, for the first time in history, we've also had some progress on renters' rights. We're now working towards some national consistency for renters. So whether you're a renter or a landlord right across the country, you'll understand your rights and obligations, and we want to make sure that no renters anywhere in the country lose any existing rights. We're taking important steps to make sure that rental increases can occur just once a year in every jurisdiction. We're moving towards nationally consistent policy to require genuine reasonable grounds for eviction, and of course we're phasing in minimum rental standards across the country. These are significant and they will make a real change for renters right across Australia, Mr Speaker. And indeed, it's not just us saying this, but it's the experts and those working in the housing and homelessness area that say this. Indeed, our announcements have been welcomed, particularly by the Community Housing Industry Association, who described them as, and I quote, a real policy breakthrough. National Shelter said it was, quote, long overdue reform. And of course the Grattan Institute's analysis of our plans was headlined, and I quote, National Cabinet's new housing plan could fix our rental crisis, Mr Speaker. In fact, the Grattan Institute said we could save renters $32 billion over the decade if we meet this target with our reforms. $32 billion over the decade saving for renters. Mr Speaker, we're getting on with the job now and we're planning for the future when it comes to housing in Australia. We've already unlocked the $575 million. We have houses on the ground today because of that decision. We of course know there will be thousands more because of the $2 billion into social housing with the $2 billion social Social Housing Accelerator. We, of course, are boosting rental assistance just this month for those people who get CRA at the moment. We've funded a $1.7 billion one-year extension to the Housing and Homelessness Agreement, and we've helped more than 67,000 people into their first home since the election. We're getting on with the job, working for Australians to turn around the housing challenges.
Call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Australians are worried. Not only are they dealing with rising costs of energy, but they're also trying to make sense of headlines that warn us of an unreliable grid that is likely to lead to energy shortages. Why isn't the government doing more to get solar on individual homes and to incentivise landlords to add solar wherever possible? And why aren't we lifting the cap on the small-scale renewable energy scheme from 100 kilowatts to 1,000 kilowatts to accelerate the distributed energy resource?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question, although I must disagree with the premise that she puts to the House, because in the budget this government delivered a $1.7 billion package to help Australian businesses, households and councils make the transition to renewable energy, Mr Speaker. And $1.7 billion is not a small amount of money when you put it to such a cause, Mr Speaker. It enables households and small businesses and local governments to make the sorts of investments they want to, with some government assistance through low-interest loans and through grants as appropriate, to make those decisions. Now, the honourable member refers to, in effect, the Statement of Electricity Opportunities out last week, and it does underline the importance and the urgency of the transition to renewable energy, something that some honourable members in the House understand, like the honourable member for North Sydney does, and others do not. Now, these warnings from the energy market operator, as was contained in last week's Statement of Electricity Opportunities, are not new. There were similar warnings given in the same statements in 2019 and 2020 and 21, almost exactly the same wording in many instances. The difference is, in this instance, this government is acting. The previous government had 21 energy policies, couldn't land one, and as a result we saw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power leave the grid and only 1 gigawatt come on, a situation we are remedying.
The call to the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Can the Attorney-General update the House on the referendum for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander recognition through a voice?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Lyons for his question. It's timely to remind those opposite and all Australians what this referendum is actually about. Because, as the member for Barara and many others have commented, the No case wants to debate every issue imaginable except the one that's on the ballot paper. The issue on the ballot paper is the addition of 3 very straightforward sentences to the Constitution. The proposed amendment is this: in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. That is it. Unlike the Leader of the Opposition's announcement over the weekend calling for a second referendum, the constitutional recognition through a voice that is currently before the Australian people does not come from politicians. It came directly from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people themselves. We know that when governments listen to people, they get better results, they get better outcomes, they use funding more effectively. We all know that the current approach is not working. The gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians is not closing in health, in education, in housing and on just about every other measure. There is an 8-year gap in life expectancy. The suicide rate for Indigenous Australians is twice as high as the rate for non-Indigenous Australians. Rates of disease and infant mortality are higher for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. After years of failed programs and policies, Indigenous Australians are not seeking a purely symbolic form of constitutional recognition, which would not do anything to turn things around. What is needed is a practical form of constitutional recognition. What is needed is a voice.
Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.